Good morning, everyone. I see some names flashing across my screen that I recognize. Welcome to this session for the Maine Hire a Vet workshop on the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. My name is Debbie Kelly. I work for the U.S. Department of Labor here in Maine as the Maine Director for Veterans Employment and Training Service. I was in the Navy for 6 years, and I've been in this position for a little over 9 years. Believe it or not, it's gone by really fast. Glad everybody was able to join us this morning for this session. Hopefully you all weathered the storm okay. I was a little nervous yesterday when we were practicing the session to make sure all our logistics were working, and I had no power and no internet. So I'm very happy to power this morning and the internet's working and the sun is shining. So want to welcome all of you, and also want to welcome our state workforce board veterans committee members today. This is the beginning of your meeting, and then you will stay on after we conclude this session to continue your meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-host today, Dennis Wellman will introduce himself, Bethany Mazzaro.
Good morning, everybody. I just, on behalf of the Employer Supportive Guard Reserve Program, I want to thank everybody for allowing us to come and be part of this whole program. I'm not so sure if you can see me right now because on my phone it says start video and it's checked out. I don't know if it's talking about having the host allow me to come in. So, okay, there we go. Not that I want you to see me. There's probably a lot of glare up my forehead, as Debbie so graciously has pointed out to begin with this morning. But anyway, I want to thank everybody for allowing us to come in as part of this whole program. I've been the state chair for the ESGR program, the main committee, for the past year. Prior to that, I was a volunteer for the ESGR committee for the last 7 years or so. And my previous work experience has been working as an employment support specialist with a federal contractor for the ESGR program for about 3 years. And then previous to that, I worked with the state of Maine Bureau of Employment Security with various positions, ending with the Veterans Program Manager, similar to, or actually doing the position that Auta Maine is in right now. And that spanned over about 25 years that I worked there. And then I also retired from a combination of the Maine Air National Guard and the U.S. Air Force with about 33 years in with that career. The majority of my civilian employment included working closely with employers and civilian and military members looking for work or retraining. And so this involved a lot of contact with both small employers and large employers and HR personnel in search of getting job seekers in with companies that were looking for some good quality candidates. So this offered me a real good, thorough perspective on both the employer side and the job seeker side, and then what were the respective needs of each individual, the individuals looking for work, as well as the employers that were seeking qualified candidates. The main ESGR committee is a volunteer organization, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in my brief. But we do have one full-time paid employee, which is a volunteer support specialist, and her name is Bethany Mazzaro, and she's going to introduce herself right now as well.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's roundtable session on ESGR and USERRA. I'm definitely very proud to be here with everyone so that we can provide you with more information in regards to employer and employment rights or employee rights for service members that are serving as citizen soldiers. I shouldn't say citizen soldiers, that's my background, but service members, they also serve as employees and serve in military service. My background, that gets me right into my background. My segue here is I retired from the Army National Guard as an active duty member after 23 years, and went from my boots right into high heels, and went to work for the Department of Labor Career Center as a youth employee representative. And then I transitioned over into this position as the veterans. I'm sorry, I guess I'm nervous, the volunteer technician for the ESGR program. So we are going to start today. I am going to come down here and share my screen with you so that we can go over a few of the. Okay, let's see if we can get this on here correctly. I would like to share with you some of our house rules or our house notes, and they will be. If you could please ensure that your cell phone ringers are off or on mute. Mute all your audio and video while we're here today. The chat box is available. Please take advantage of any questions you have in the chat box. I will be monitoring, and we will be able to provide you with answers to any questions that you have. And we are going to be recording, or this is recording now, therefore it will be available on YouTube. I also want to let you know that I will be providing the information on everybody's point of contact information, so that you may take down that if you would like to contact us at another time. At this time, we're going to segment into our first brief roundtable panelist, which will be back to Dennis Wellman, and he will provide you with information in regards to ESGR.
Good morning once again. Thank you, Bethany. Good morning once again, everybody. I'm going to be talking about the ESGR program and its relation to USERRA, and then we're going to progress right into Deb Kelly's brief. And basically, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to have to apologize up front here. The technology that I'm using is my smartphone. I don't have connections with a full screen computer or anything like that, so it's all off of my text phone. And I see, so just keep that in mind as I go through this brief. But we're going to talk a little bit. I just want to outline what the ESGR program is, and then kind of progress into how we assist individuals with USERRA inquiries, etc. So I just want to give a quick historical perspective of the ESGR program, and talk a little bit about our employee recognition program, how that ties into USERRA, and then talk about the USERRA Ombudsman program here. And we're going to really use our esgr.mil website to kind of surf through it as I'm doing my brief. So Bethany, if you could bring up that website. Basically, ESGR is a Department of Defense program which was established in 1972, right after or during the time when it was decided that there was going to be the draft was going to end. At the time when it was established, it was a situation where they figured there was going to be potentially some issues between employers and part-time Guard and Reserve members. So they established this ESGR, Employer Support and Guard and Reserve program to help with that, to assist with any of those issues that may come up between civilian employers and part-time employees. The organization itself has grown over the years. And currently there's a program in every single state across the country, along with 4 different territories to include Washington, D.C., the Virgin Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, etc. There's some 3,300. This is a volunteer-led organization, and there's 3,300 volunteers across the country, and with the 54 committees. Here in the state of Maine, we have 20 to 25 volunteers that are spread across Maine, from Fort Kent to Peaks Island, from Rumford to Calais. And those individuals are in a lot of different positions, civilian government positions around the state, a lot of retirees from military branches, etc. So we got a wide range of individuals that are civic leaders, etc. across the state. And these volunteers have good connections within their local communities with small businesses and industries, government and education, etc. And the main focus of our whole program, the ESGR program, is to build a great, strong link between our part-time service members, the Guard and Reserve members, and their civilian employers. And we want that to be an open communication. We want it, and one of our main focuses is to educate the employers about our program and the USERRA law as well. And the USERRA law, of course, is the Uniform Services Employment Reemployment Rights Act. We're going to be talking about that a lot, and but we'll use the acronym USERRA just to keep that in mind. So that's our focus, is to build a good, positive working relationship between our service members, their families, and our local employers. So one of the main ways that we do that, here in the state we have, well, first off, let me just back up to say a little bit, because here in the state we have around 4,200 Guard and Reserve members spread across the 7 SEALs. Whenever you heard that term 7 SEALs, it means the 7 different military branches that are covered under Guard and Reserve. We have the Air Force, the Air National Guard, the Army National Guard, and then we have the reserve forces of the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Coast Guard. So those are the 7 different SEALs that we cover. And there's some 4,200 service members across the state that we help support. And so just keep that in mind. And of course, these service members work in just about every industry across the state, anywhere from Fortune 500 companies to small employers to government agencies, etc. So, and one of the ways that we try to build a real good working relationship is through our recognition program. And if you go, and Bethany has the slide up, or actually has the website up, and if she goes into the icon that says Employer Awards on the top, you'll see a number of these awards that we use in encouraging the service member to recognize their supportive employers. Unfortunately enough, here in the state, we have some really supportive employers across the state. And we've had a large number of employers that have been recognized with our Patriot Award, because that's one of our basic awards, or the main award that we really push for. And Bethany, if you could just click on that Patriot Award, you'll see what some of the requirements are for individuals for service members in order to recognize their employer. And basically they need to recognize one individual, like their main supervisor, et cetera. And it's a real quick nomination process that you can do right online, or we have paper copies that you can send in as well. So I just wanted to point that one out. I don't want to go into detail about all these awards. You certainly can do that on your own once you bring up this website. But that was one of the main ones that we wanted to point out. And it comes back to our office, or it can come back to the individual, and they can recognize the employer on their own, or we can. Prior to COVID-19, we were strongly encouraging, and we still are encouraging, each individual to have it come back to our committee, and then we can go out and set up a formal recognition ceremony. Sometimes it's covered by the media, sometimes it's not, etc. But currently, with the restrictions under COVID-19, we haven't been able to do that type of thing, and that's one of the things that our volunteer team has really missed doing, because it is a real positive thing for the employers and for the individuals. Right now, what we do is we try to set up a Zoom meeting doing a presentation to the employers. So we're trying to, at a national level, there's really been a lot of work around as far as how we are approaching our business. And this is one of the things that we're doing, is trying to do it online. So the other thing under the award, just that one thing I just wanted to point out, is the top level award that you can get is the Secretary of Defense Freedom Award. And Bethany, if you click on that, it would show the process that it takes. And the reason I wanted to point this one out is because there's a nomination period, and the nomination period is open right now. So if you have military, if anybody in the audience knows of a military member or has a military member they're connecting with them, tell them that they need to get this nomination in by the end of December. It generally runs from the 1st of October to the end of December. And these are high-level awards. It's something that in the past, I have to keep saying that because of the COVID-19 restrictions, but in the past, they've been, whoever has won this award, the employer that has won this award has been given a trip to DC to have this presented at the Department of Defense by the Secretary of Defense. And so it is a top level award. They're really competitive. They're highly competitive. In fact, there's 3 different classes of employers, from small to large to government agencies. Those are the 3 different classes, and there's only 15 in each category across the 54 state committees. So it is competitive, but it does a lot in helping recognize our employers, and it's really beneficial to our goal and obligation of trying to maintain a good working relationship with our employers. And so then, of course, the main focus of the presentation today is around the USERRA, and for us is our ombudsman program. And this is one of our main priorities from the national level all the way to each one of the state committees. If you look at the USERRA law, even though ESGR has been around since 1972, the USERRA law didn't come into effect, didn't become federal law until 1994. And that's when we started our ombudsman program a couple of years after that. And obviously, as you may know, the main purpose of this federal law is to ensure that people that have served or is serving in the armed forces or reserve are not disadvantaged by their civilian careers, or they're promptly reemployed in their civilian jobs once they come off of a deployment or an active duty tour, etc. Or they're not discriminated against in employment based on past, present, or future military service. There's an icon on this website, the USERRA icon, and I see Bethany is bringing it up there, that is packed full of information for employers, for service members, etc. And it also gives you the general guidelines of exactly what the USERRA law is, the role of the USERRA law and its purpose. So I just want to go through quickly what happens if we get a USERRA inquiry from an employer or for a service member. Generally what happens is it will come into the call will come into Bethany, or if an employer is seasoned and they've had had some contact before with us, they might come directly to myself or to one of our other volunteers. But what we do as far as the process goes, once that inquiry comes in, we'll direct it through our ombudsman program. And our ombudsman director for the state is David Keaton. And he's a retired major from the Army Guard. And he reviews that inquiry. And if he's not available, it comes to one of our other ombudsmen, which we have 3 in the state that have been trained. And I'm one of those individuals. So it comes to me, or it comes to our previous state chair, Josh Scroggins, and we'll review those inquiries and talk with the service members and give them a sense of whether or not they have a potential case, or if it's an employer that we're contacting, we'll direct them to the actual law and the place in the law that might give them an answer for their questions. And if we're not able to do that, we'll send them to our national office. We have a 1-800 number, which is listed right off of that USERRA web, that icon on our ESGR website. We'll send them to the national office in DC. And we have, I just went through a national leadership meeting. They said that assigned to that ombudsman program, we have 28 full-time staff that are assigned to that ombudsman program at the national level. So, and that's 28 individuals out of a total national staff of 50-something people. So you can see how much of a preference they're putting on for this ombudsman program. But anyway, they have a lot of information and obviously a lot of qualifications and understanding of the law. And so we'll send them to the national level. If it gets to a point, if the inquiry, the USERRA inquiry gets to a point where it can't be settled with phone calls, then we actually develop a case log for it, and it gets sent back to the state ombudsman director, whoever it is in that state. In our state, it gets sent back to our ombudsman director, and depending on the workload of the state, one of us 3 will handle that case. And the way the process works, we have, as an individual, we have 2 business days to respond to the service member, because that information will be given in that national inquiry, in that national phone call. It will give the service member's name, the employer's name, etc. And we have 2 days to respond to the service member. The service member tells us whether or not we can contact their employer, and then we contact the employer, and we have 2 days to contact an employer. And so you can see there's a timeline there that we have to follow, and everything within that should be resolved within 10 to 14 days if we're able to resolve it. Here in the state of Maine, we're so fortunate because of the fact that we have such supportive employers, and we're able to work out a lot of the issues during those initial phone calls. If it gets to a case and we can't get it resolved, prior to COVID-19, the ombudsman were allowed to go out and actually visit the employers and talk with the employers and et cetera. But a lot of it is done over the phone, and now everything's done over the phone. But if we're not able to resolve that case, and it's an informal negotiations, according talking with Debbie about this, because it isn't a formal case at all. Even though I keep saying case, it's more of an informal inquiry and a negotiation that we try to do. But if we're not able to do it, then what we will do is recommend that the individual either go to the DVET, which is Debbie, which she's going to talk extensively about the law itself, or they have an opportunity to go to a private lawyer. But we always try to strongly encourage them, and we work hard at trying to get it resolved at our level first. And if not, then we'll refer them on to Debbie or to a private lawyer if they so choose. But that's some of the main processes that we have with our ombudsman. And rather than getting into the law, because Debbie's going to talk about the law itself, you can see on our USERRA website there that we do have, in this here, especially if you look at it from a USERRA for the employers, you'll see that the federal law there's a lot of sources for different parts of the law in there. And it gets specific to, depending on what the inquiry is about, it will really get to specific to the issue, that specific issue. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that, and I'm just going to point this out, they have an area on frequently asked questions. So a lot of times we can get some of the, I'll give you an example. If there's an employer that's never had a service member employed with them, a part-time service member, a Guard Reserve member employed with them, they may not know about this law. And so there's some very basic things that they can get an understanding of just by going to this frequently asked questions area. And we try to refer them to that depending on what the inquiry is as well. So, which is real useful. So we try to pump this website out to them a lot, and we give them a lot of basic information when we're doing our education piece with employers. The only other thing I wanted to point out here on this website is the state pages. So if you go up to the state pages website, and I know Bethany has brought this up before during this brief, but if you click on Maine, obviously you see the US map, and you click on Maine, it will give you all the contact information of who our primary committee leadership is, as far as the ESGR program as well. Although you can't bring up specific contact information, the main way to contact us is through Bethany, and Bethany is information there is on the left-hand side of that. And and the reason I'm pointing this out more is that we have a lot of employers, and especially in this type of a workforce now, it's so mobile, that we have a lot of employers that might not even be based in Maine, but the individual will be working in Maine. And the way our inquiries work, the ombudsman inquiries work, that if there's a individual that's working, we'll say out of Arkansas, for example, or the main office is in Arkansas, but the individual is working in Maine, and their ombudsman, a inquiry, a USERRA inquiry comes into our national office, even though the service member works in Maine, the inquiry has to work through that state where the corporate office is. And so, for instance, and we try to educate our service members about this, that if they need to know who the contact information is in Arkansas, because that's where their employer is based out of, then you can just bring it up. So it's a real good quick reference guide. And so that's why I wanted to point that out. There is a lot of information on this whole ESGR.mil website, but those are the key things I wanted to point out here, for us. And I know we didn't go into any statistics for ESGR as far as how many inquiries we had, but there is a great right off of our about ESGR. If you go where it says about ESGR, the icon, there is a year in review, and it gives you some of the statistics of what we've done at the national level or across the country, as far as the numbers of awards that we've given out, the numbers of USERRA briefings that we've had, the service members briefings, USERRA cases that have been assigned, etc. So you can read through that. I mean, and obviously this is a public website, so you can go in and just click on anything that you can open up and get a good idea of what ESGR is and how we work with our ombudsman program, how we work with our awards program, etc. So I guess with that, my part of the brief is done. I think we're going to wait until the end for questions. So now I'm going to turn it over to the really qualified professional on USERRA. And Debbie, thank you for allowing us to be part of this too. You contacted us initially, so, but, okay, so it's on to you.
Thanks, Dennis. Thanks, and thanks for the information. And before I start, I'm gonna go ahead and pull up my presentation. So I think what Dennis ended with is kind of a key thing here in Maine. I think for those of you who are familiar with ESGR and with me as the director for the USDOL vets here in Maine, you know, I think we in Maine do a really good job of collaborating, not just between the two of us, but with employers, with the service, with different organizations to try to mitigate any issues before they rise to the level of a claim. So as I go through this, just kind of keep that in mind, because I think that that's something that maybe you wouldn't see in a lot of other states. And we have employers here in Maine that have offices in other states, and it doesn't necessarily work that way. So, okay, Marcel, so I can't forward my slides. If you can help me.
Working on it.
All right, so while you're doing that, I'm just going to keep talking. So Dennis briefly spoke about USERRA went into effect in 1994. Prior to that, there was some protection, but it wasn't very thorough, and this law definitely formalized the protection for service members. So when we talk about my role and as an investigator for USERRA, so the U.S. Department of Labor Vets is the formal designator for investigations under USERRA. So what I always try to explain to everybody is that the law itself, can go back one slide. The law itself is a federal law. So each state has laws at a state level that mirror USERRA. So even though this is at a federal level, it applies to all employers, but it certainly is at a federal level, and then there's state laws. So that's good. One more slide. So what ESGR and the U.S. Department of Labor, when we're talking about USERRA, it's at a federal level. So when we run into issues where someone has concerns about state-specific laws, then we normally will address that to the Attorney General's office, because they really are the enforcer of state level USERRA statutes. The other piece is, being at a federal level, protecting civilian employment for service members is what USERRA does. We as investigators, or in the role of providing technical assistance to an employer or to a service member, are not representing the service member. So the law protects the service member, and then my role as an investigator, or if I'm providing technical assistance, is to represent the law and to ensure that the law has not been violated. So I think that's a clear, it needs to be clear to the employer and to the service member that we're not representing, we're neutral in that we protect the law, not necessarily the individuals involved. You can go to the next slide. So when we talk about uniform services, so there's sometimes some confusion about whether or not voluntary or involuntary duty is different as far as protection under USERRA. So it protects both voluntary or involuntary. And what I like to share with individuals normally is that right now we have an all volunteer force. So everyone technically is on voluntary orders. Sometimes we have employers that will say, well, somebody who works for us has repeatedly volunteered for additional orders. They're not really orders that they need to go on. So the law does still protect somebody who is choosing to accept additional orders beyond what we might call involuntary recalls. It does protect them. Now, we do encourage that there's conversation and, you know, with the employee and with the employer to ensure that they're not taking on orders to the point where they become an undue burden on the employer as well. So you'll see on this slide, you know, the different types of duty that are covered: National Guard, active components, reserve components. The public health service and the National Disaster Medical System teams are also protected under USERRA. And we have had a couple cases involving those here in Maine, actually just recently. Next slide. And as I go through these, if questions come up, I'm going to have you just put them in the chat or save them to the end just so we can get through them. I do have quite a few. I'll try to be as quick as I can. I think a lot of you have heard me talk about USERRA, but usually more in a vague manner. So this is a little bit more in depth for this presentation. So employees that are covered you know, do include part-time, temporary, seasonal employees. Those are pretty common here in Maine, but not independent contractors, students, volunteers. And then employers that fall under USERRA requirements do include sometimes joint employers. So we have employees sometimes who have two employers that cover them as employees. And then successors and interests is an interesting one, and we've seen a little bit of those here in Maine specifically, where an entity is bought out by another organization or they're merged, and that employer becomes what we call a successor in interest, in that they have an obligation to that employee who is on military duty to provide them reemployment rights. Next slide. So these are essentially, you know, the law prohibits employment discrimination, retaliation, requires reemployment following military service and the continuation of benefits, and then the right for a service member or a veteran to file a complaint with the U.S. Department of Labor. Next slide. And these are just the different statutes and regulations that cover USERRA. 38 USC is the statute, and then 20 CFR covers all private local state employers. And then the federal government has an additional requirement under 5 CFR. Next slide, please. So why is USERRA important? So on this slide, you see that, you know, we've had over 1 million Guard and Reserve members mobilize since 2001. So what does that mean? That means that each of those that have been mobilized potentially have impacted a civilian employer. So the protection is important. The guidance for employers is important so that they understand what they're obligated to do and how to ensure that those rights for those service members is protected during mobilization and following their mobilization. You can go to the next slide. So again, employers can't discriminate, retaliate, or take any adverse employment action for any type of service. So it includes initial hiring. If somebody's going to, we've had situations where someone's just applying for military service, you know, just honor duty, honor guard, those type of service are definitely protected as well. It's past, present, or future service. You can't retaliate against anyone trying to protect their rights, or anybody that's involved in as a witness cannot be retaliated against. And in addition to discrimination and retaliation, in the past few years, the law has allowed for hostile work environment claims to be filed as well. Those are obviously a lot less black and white than the retaliation or reemployment type claims. And we have not had a lot of those here in Maine. So when we look at discrimination and retaliation, so initially the burden of, when we're looking at the investigative process, the initial burden is on the service member. So we're looking for the service member to be able to show us that there's been an adverse action, that it was motivated by their military service. It doesn't have to be the only motivation, but it has to be a motive for the action, and that they were in a protected category. So a lot of times I get calls from service members who just had something happen at work, but it has nothing to do with their military service, but they believe that they're protected under USERRA. And that's really, it's not an overarching umbrella. It is really specific to discrimination and retaliation or hostile work environment due to their military service. Next slide. And so when we look at some of the things, you know, especially from a employer standpoint, we have some circumstantial evidence. You know, a lot of times it's not like very obvious that there has been any type of discrimination or retaliation. So we follow the Sheehan factors, which are listed there: proximity in time, whether there's been any expressed hostility toward that specific member or military members in general, if there's any inconsistencies in the actions that have been taken by the employer. And then we also look at disparate treatment. So as far as, you know, the same or similar situations, how were this specific service member treated compared to other non-service members. Again, you know, here in Maine, we have very supportive employers. I've never had a case here in Maine where somebody has said, you know, that they've had just expressed hostility across the board against military service members in their organization. So very thankful that we don't run into those type of things. What I will say is it's just not fully understanding how to apply the law, or the situations just don't fit neatly into what, you know, somebody would normally look at for the next steps as to what they're obligated to do under the law. So I think in that sense, that's what we're here for, as far as, you know, calling me or calling ESGR and talking some of those situations through. I think definitely mitigates it being a situation where somebody feels like they have to be filing a claim against their employer. Can you go to the next slide, please, Marcel? So reemployment, so, you know, we have the discrimination, we have the retaliation, hostility piece, but, you know, a lot of what we normally see when we get technical assistance calls, or when we get cases, is that it's specific to reemployment following military service. And essentially any person who's absent for military service is entitled to reemployment rights under USERRA. Next slide, please. So the eligibility to be for reemployment is that the service member had to leave their civilian job to perform military service. They had to provide some type of notice to their employer, whether it's verbal or written. Now, there are some exceptions to that, because we do have service members who are on special platforms where they may not have advance notice. They may have only 24 or 48 hours notice, and that is considered still notice. It's just not probably as advanced as, you know, some employers would prefer. Hopefully they've had that conversation with their employer and they're aware of that prior to them being activated in those circumstances. There is a 5-year limit. So if you have a service member who has been with you for many years and they have gone over 5 years of military service, not consecutive, then they may no longer be eligible for reemployment. Now, since September 11th, 2001, a lot of the orders that are deemed necessary, you know, as a national response have actual language in the orders that will say if those orders are exempt from the 5-year limit. We have had a couple cases where somebody has had 9 years, 14 years of service following 9/11, and those have been exempt from the 5-year limit. So it does happen, but the law protects them in those circumstances. They can't have received a disqualifying discharge from military service, and then they have to provide timely notice back to their employer if they have an intent to return to that employment. So if somebody leaves for military service and they never request reemployment, and there's certain timelines that they have to follow. If it's less than 30 days, they have to request reemployment or return to work for the next 8-hour shift that they would have normally been on. 31 to 180 days, they have 14 days. If it's more than 181 days, they have 90 days. So unless the person is incapacitated where they are unable, or it would be unreasonable for them to return to work within that time following military service, they would lose their reemployment rights in those circumstances. Next slide. So employers can ask for the orders to be adjusted if there's a concern about the timing. That has happened where, there's been a need in the civilian employment at a certain time, and there's also training. I know that the Adjutant General Farnham here in Maine has encouraged employers to keep those lines of communication open. It's important to note, though, that at the end of the day, it's the military's decision. So an employer can ask, but they don't have the right to demand it or to require it or to take any type of action against the employee if it doesn't work out the way they had wanted. Again, the notice to the employer is required, but it's not a permission. So they have to allow the service member to go. It's just they have to provide notice. And then as far as documentation, I think the National Guard, the reserves, everyone, we always tell service members to provide as much documentation as early as possible to their employer, but it is actually not required unless the length of service is over 30 days. Again, we recommend strongly that they always provide as much as they can as early as possible. And then an employer cannot delay or deny reemployment if those orders are not available at the time. And that has happened. We have had situations where the units just haven't been able to provide timely orders. So the escalator principle. So in a nutshell, this means we use this term to describe what position a service member would be entitled to returning from military service. And so we think about it as an escalator. So they're on the escalator. If they hadn't left for military service, what position would they have been in had they never left? And so a couple of things there. We're looking for something of the equivalent seniority, status, and pay. Looking at promotions, is there some level of reasonable certainty that they would have been promoted had they never left? The escalator goes up and down. So, we've seen this with COVID. Some employers have downsized. So the service member goes on military leave, comes back, and the position they were in no longer exists. So they could potentially not have a position because had they not left for military service, they would not have had a position. That would be following the escalator. Now, most employers still try to find a position that's of equal, status, pay, and seniority, but that doesn't always exist and is not always possible. Somebody leaves and their contract runs out, then their contract runs out. Same thing. The escalator, if they hadn't left, would have been that position doesn't exist. There are some requirements for the employer to make reasonable efforts for the employee to meet qualifications if they've been gone for a certain amount of time and there's been some training or skills that they miss. When they return, they should have training in a reasonable amount of time to meet those qualifications. And the same thing for somebody who returns with a disability. The employer has a requirement to provide reasonable accommodations for those disabilities. When a service member returns from military service, they are protected against discharge except for cause. So if somebody is gone for more than 30 days, up to 180 days, that protection is for that period of 180 days. If it's more than 180 days, that protection is for 1 year. That doesn't mean that an employer cannot discharge the employee. It just means that they would have to have cause to do so. Next slide. So with promotions, you know, some best practices is to ensure that there's some type of mechanism in place for ensuring that service members are considered, especially those, you know, again, that reasonable certainty standard, having a point of contact or someone who can act on the service member's behalf while they're absent, and then ensuring that you have established lines of communication while the service member is away to ensure that there isn't a missed opportunity. It's a lot easier to ensure that they apply and are considered even while they're gone versus not doing it. Someone else is hired, promoted, and then the individual comes back and says, hey, I would have applied for that. And now it's a lot messier. So definitely encourage that. Essentially, rights and benefits while they're absent. Employees that are on military duty are considered to be in a leave of absence. They can use any type of leave they have available to them, but they cannot be forced to do that. And they are entitled to certain benefits while they're away from military service. And this includes health plan benefits and pension benefits. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with those. If there are specific questions, usually those are better to answer one-on-one. So some efforts that we have, and Dennis talked a little bit about this, you know, as far as outreach and education, briefings, a lot of this we do in collaboration with ESGR. On the DOL website, there is an e-laws advisor that kind of walks through different questions to see if somebody's is eligible for protection under USERRA and if potentially their rights have been violated. And then most employers know that there's a poster that is required to be in every workplace describing USERRA rights. Next slide. So the different avenues for relief, you know, Dennis talked about is, you know, that we would encourage employees to try to resolve the issue with their employer first. And then if they haven't been terminated already, then to seek assistance from ESGR. You know, I'm always available. I get calls at least, I would say weekly, if, you know, if not every couple of weeks, from either service members or from employers. So we are available. We encourage everyone to call us and to have those conversations as early as possible. As Dennis talked about, you know, ESGR informally mediates complaints. They do not investigate or evaluate for USERRA violations. Somebody can file a complaint with vets at any time. They don't have to exhaust other pathways first. There's no statute of limitation, and they always have a right to seek private counsel at any time at their own expense. Next slide. So all investigations are complaint driven. We have an obligation to complete our investigations within 90 days unless the claimant provides us approval to extend that. We do have cases that go over, especially during when COVID first happened. I had 2 cases that were open, and both of them had to exceed those 90 days. If somebody chooses to have a third party represent them, we do have to evaluate to make sure that that's not interfering with our investigation. And we are not able to discuss any open cases with outside parties. I will say that we here in Maine still do a lot as far as communication with ESGR to ensure that we can handle cases at the lowest level possible, or potential cases at the lowest, but we try to ensure that we're not violating any of the Privacy Act, or we do ensure that we don't in the process of doing that. And so as a federal investigator, the law provides me access to interview persons and to review and receive documents. I haven't had to exercise this in the state of Maine, but we do have subpoena authority. Employers in Maine are usually more than happy to offer their staff and their information to try to resolve any concerns that an employee has as early as possible. So I have not had to exercise that here in Maine. Next slide. So this just gives an overview of the number of cases. Looking at fiscal year 18 cases, there were over 1,000 cases. Only about 20% of those were substantiated, meaning that the investigator found merit in the case, or they were able to be settled, which, and the next is that 80% of them were informally resolved. So that often means that they were settled, or when we call the employer, they say, oh, geez, I didn't know that that's what we were supposed to do. Yeah, let's just take care of that. And then the service member usually will withdraw their claim at that point. So approximately 5 cases each FY involve Maine employers. Again, I think a lot of that is due to the fact that we have so much technical assistance that occurs between ESGR and their process and employers giving me a call directly. Next slide. So the remedies, so with USERRA, it's compliance driven. So the whole goal of USERRA is to protect, and then when someone has had their rights violated, is to make them whole. And so we're looking at reinstatement. If somebody was not reemployed properly, we want to make sure that they're reemployed in the position that they should have been had it not been for military service. And then looking at if there's any lost wages or benefits. And then in situations where there might have been a violation of a hostile work environment, then it would be in order to comply with USERRA and to not create a hostile work environment. When the cases, if cases are referred to the level of the Department of Justice or the Office of Special Counsel, there is an avenue to seek liquidated damages, but we do not do that at our level in our investigative process. Next slide. So best practices, obviously we talked a lot about the education piece to both the employees and the employers. Again, we are so fortunate here in Maine because we collaborate with the service, with ESGR, with the employers, establishing two-way communication. You know, definitely the more communication between the service member and their civilian employer, the less likely we're to see some of those disputes that occur. Definitely encourage always the resolution at the lowest level possible. If we're able to, you know, get the employee to just have a conversation and to get them to resolve it on their own, that is the ideal situation. So I can't say it enough. If there are questions, you hear of questions, you have questions, to seek some, you know, technical assistance directly from VETS or ESGR. We definitely like to keep it here in Maine because I think we're familiar with the climate here. We have the resources here. So as much as possible, we try to answer those questions here at our local level. Next slide. And that's it. And if I went too fast, I'm sorry, but I was trying to stay on time. So, Bethany, do we have any questions in the chat first?
We do not have any questions in the chat. There was a request for the point of contact information, which I have provided, and I can share a slide once again so that everybody can see that. So here we go.
Perfect. Does anyone on the Zoom have a question? I know I went very fast through those slides, so hopefully if you have questions, you'll speak up. We definitely are available if you have questions afterwards. Bethany's going to put our contact information up.
Debbie, this is Leo.
Hi, Leo.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Could you kind of address like the no wrong door policy when it comes to reporting, whether they report to ESGR or through USERRA?
Yes. So normally there is no wrong door, right? So no wrong door. If you call me directly, you have my information. You can call ESGR directly. If you call the JAGs at the National Guard, we all communicate with each other. So we all ensure that service members, employers will get routed to the best level and the best person to answer their question and to help resolve any concerns at that, as you know, at the level that we think is necessary. So absolutely. Normally, the only time I won't send someone back to ESGR if they call me directly is if they've already been terminated. There are some situations where I might, but if the person has already tried to resolve it, you know, through their union or through their internal appeals process, usually at that point, there's not a whole lot of help that an informal mediation process will provide. But it really depends on the specific circumstance. Dennis, do you have anything that you'd want to add to that?
No, I think you summed it up really well, Debbie. We do, and I just want to reiterate what you said. We do have a real good open communication between us and your office and the other offices that are associated with USERRA. So we'd like to think that here at ESGR that we can handle as much as possible at the lowest level. So I know our 3 ombudsmen that we have here in the state are well-trained and they have a super understanding of the law and work well with the employers to educate them. What seems to happen is that a lot of times if a service member comes because they've heard from another service member and that their case might be something that's that needs to be handled at a higher level. And then they realize once they start talking with one of the ombudsmen that we can, that they were wrong, because not every single individual has, you know, it's not comparable with another situation. So we can handle a lot of those initial inquiries really easily. And Debbie obviously has a lot more experience and technical expertise around the law than we do, but we contact her. The other thing that we have available to us as ombudsmen is that every single state have ombudsmen, and we connect with our ombudsmen in other states as well, especially here in the Northeast, because it's broken up by region. So we will work with Debbie, we will work with our other ombudsman that's had a lot of experience and that may have had more experience than we do. And so we try to really work with it at the lowest level. Although, you know, there is an open door policy to every office, and we don't want that to be missed, but we can take care of, I feel that we as the ESGR program here in the state can really take care of the lower level questions. And if not, we do have those other resources. So, and
I would just add that the ombudsman, so the ombudsman also have my contact information. So there are situations where they feel like they're just not, you know, it's not clear, or they want to whiteboard a specific situation, and we will have those conversations. So again, there really is no wrong door, because all of us are communicating and ensuring that whoever calls us is getting the right information. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Comments?
Thank you, Dennis.
You're welcome, Leo.
Yes, you're welcome.
There are no other questions in the chat at this time.
Okay, one question that I know has come up during this period of COVID that I just want to share with the group is that there have been specific military training and orders that service members have been placed on that require a period of quarantine. In one circumstance, it sounded like the quarantined individual was not actually on orders while they were being quarantined. And then on the other circumstance that came to my attention, the unit did put them on orders for the period of quarantine. But I had actually a state employer call on one of them and then a private employer for another one. So it is something that has come up. It is protected by USERRA whether they're on orders or not during that time, because it is being required by the military. Hopefully they would be put on orders. That would make it a lot more simple. I think it puts the service member in a difficult position if they're not put on orders for that required quarantine period. But I thought I'd share that as something that's unique to this current season of COVID.
Debbie, this is JR. I have a question. If a service member goes into service, he's deployed, he gets a service-connected disability and comes back and is unable to perform the position with that employer that he had. Are they demanded to find another position that would suit this veteran?
Yeah, that's a good question, JR. So it really depends on when they are diagnosed or receive the actual disability and when their reemployment is. Once they're reemployed, and this is what we've seen most often, is that they are reemployed and then the diagnosis for a specific disability occurs. At that time, the person falls under ADA just like any other employee would. In situations where somebody comes back with a disability, so we've had situations where someone's like a police officer and they come back with an injury or a disability that prevents them from going back to the same position they were in before they left. Then that employer has an obligation to provide some level of reasonable training and reasonable accommodation to help reemploy the person in a similar position. But if they're not able to, and they've exhausted all options, then they may just not they may not be able to be reemployed by that employer. The employer does not have to create a new position for that individual. But that's something that would really be a situation where we would want them to contact us, that employer we would want them to contact us and discuss it, because that's very general, and most of those situations are very unique and have very specific details that would help us to make that decision.
Thank you, Deb.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Without any other questions, we just want to thank you all for joining us today. Again, if you have additional questions, our contact information was, I think, in the chat, as well as we will have this recorded and posted, so you'll be able to see the contact information again. So with that, I conclude this session, and I will turn it over to Autumn Main for the continuation of the SWEB-VAC meeting. So if you are not here for the SWEB-VAC meeting, you can sign off now, and I'll turn it over to Autumn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
No, thank you. And on behalf of the Maine Higher Vet Planning Committee, again, thank you for presenting. And we look forward to next week.
Yes. And we do too. Thank you.
See you next week.